I never thought a grocery delivery could save me from one of the worst nights of my life, but here we are. It was pouring rain like the sky was trying to rip itself apart, and I was stuck in my tiny apartment, completely out of food and feeling more alone than I had in weeks. The kind of lonely that makes you stare at the ceiling wondering if anyone even notices you exist. Spoiler, no one does. So there I was, clicking through the delivery app because, honestly, what else was I going to do? I figured I'd order some basics. Milk, bread, maybe some frozen pizza, because I'm not about to start cooking during a storm that's basically auditioning for a disaster movie. When the notification popped up, "Your order will arrive in 30 minutes. I legit felt a little spark of hope. It was like maybe, just maybe, tonight wouldn't be total crap. 30 minutes later, the doorbell rang, and I shuffled over, already soaked from just moving inside to the door. When I opened it, there he was. This guy the first swear looked like he'd just stepped out of a movie. Tall, with a messy mop of dark hair that was damp from the rain, his jacket plastered to his frame, and these intense, honest eyes that met mine without hesitation. He smiled. The kind of smile that felt like a quiet invitation, not forced or fake. "Hey, I'm Lucas," he said, voice warm despite the cold storm wrapping around us. "I'm sorry for getting drenched. This weather is insane." I blinked, suddenly aware that I hadn't even introduced myself. "Ethan," I said, stepping aside so he could come in out of the rain, and that's when the night started to twist in a way I didn't expect. Lucas didn't just drop off the groceries, say a quick, "Thanks," and leave. No, instead, he kicked off his wet shoes at the door like it wasn't a big deal, and before I knew it, he was in my kitchen, unpacking the bags with this weird sort of ease that made everything feel less heavy. Outside, the storm was still raging, thunder bouncing off the windows, but inside my cramped apartment, there was something calming about having this stranger here, someone who didn't seem to mind the mess or the silence that usually swallowed me whole. We started talking, first about the weather, then about dumb stuff like favorite movies and bad pizza toppings, and somehow, it felt like I'd known him longer than just a half hour. By the time I glanced at the clock, 4 hours had passed. 4 hours during a storm that was supposed to be a miserable trap, but somehow felt like a beginning. And I'm sitting here now, still wondering how a random grocery delivery turned into the night. I didn't have to be alone anymore. I remember glancing at the clock and almost laughing out loud. How did 4 hours fly by so fast? The rain kept hammering against the windows like it was trying to break in, but inside, it felt like we were tucked away in some little bubble. Lucas was sitting on my couch, one leg pulled up, still dripping a bit from the storm, and I had finally poured us both some coffee, which had cooled way too fast, but we didn't care. "So you delivering groceries in weather like this?" I started, trying to sound casual but honestly curious. "Is this normal for your job, or are you secretly some kind of storm chaser?" He chuckled, shaking his head. "No, not a storm chaser, just someone who needs the extra cash. I'm a student, studying environmental science." The irony's not lost on me, delivering food in the middle of a storm. He smiled, but it was one of those smiles that didn't quite reach his eyes. I caught that, and it made me want to know more. "What made you pick this job, then?" "Besides the cash," he shrugged, a little hesitant. "Partly because it's flexible. Mostly because I can do it on my own terms. And, honestly, it gets me out of the house. Sometimes that's enough." His words hit differently because, yeah, I knew that feeling too well. The urge to escape yourself and your walls. I found myself opening up, telling him about how I'd been stuck in this rut for a while. How working from home during lockdowns had left me more isolated than I thought I'd ever be. How I barely had energy to cook or even get groceries, which was why I was counting on this delivery to save me tonight. Lucas listened, really listened, and I noticed the way his eyes softened. "You know," he said after a moment, "sometimes it's the smallest things that pull us out of those dark patches. Like a storm forcing us to slow down, or a stranger showing up unexpectedly." I nodded, the heaviness I'd been carrying around starting to feel less suffocating. There was something about how easily he spoke, like he understood without judgment. At some point, the conversation drifted to movies. I made the mistake of confessing my guilty pleasure. Romantic comedies. Lucas raised an eyebrow but then laughed, admitting that he secretly loved them too, although he'd never tell anyone that outside this apartment. Before I knew it, we'd moved to the floor, sitting cross-legged, sharing stories about horrible dates, family quirks, and the weird things we did when we were sure no one was watching. His laughter was easy and genuine, and mine came back for the first time in a long time. Then, there was this pause, the kind that stretches just enough to feel electric. I caught myself staring at him, at how the soft light from the lamp framed his face, how the damp curls stuck to his forehead. The room felt smaller, more intimate, like the storm outside wasn't just about rain, but about something building between us. Lucas noticed, and he didn't look away. Instead, he shifted a little closer, just enough that our knees almost touched. "You know," he said quietly, "sometimes the universe throws a storm at you, but maybe it's not to scare you away. Maybe it's to bring you exactly where you need to be." I swallowed hard, not quite ready to say what I was feeling, but suddenly desperate to stay in that moment. "Yeah," I whispered, "maybe." The storm outside was still raging, but inside, I felt this warmth spreading in a way I hadn't expected. Not just from the coffee or the company, but something deeper. Something like hope. And then, just as if the night was daring me to believe in its magic, Lucas reached out and brushed a wet strand of hair off my forehead. His touch was gentle, hesitant, like he was testing the waters. But it sent a shock straight through me. I didn't pull back. Instead, I leaned into it, and for the first time in a long time, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, this crazy night was the start of something real. That's when the power flickered and went out, plunging the apartment into darkness except for the flashes of lightning from outside. Lucas's hand stayed on mine, and in that sudden blackness, it felt like the world had shrunk to just the two of us. I didn't know what was going to happen next, but I knew I wanted to find out. Storms might come and go, but nights like this, they're rare, and you hold on to them however you can. We sat there in the dark for a few seconds, just breathing each other in, the sound of the storm still pounding on the windows, lightning occasionally flashing and casting jagged shadows across the room. It was one of those moments where time kind of slows down, and everything else fades away except whatever's right in front of you. Lucas squeezed my hand lightly, then said, "Well, I guess that means no more Netflix tonight." I laughed softly, the sound low in the quiet. "Yeah, unless we want to watch it through the glare of a phone screen." He moved a little, pulling his knees closer, and I realized how close we were, close enough that if I turned my head, I could probably see the little freckles scattered across his nose. So, I started, feeling this weird mix of nerves and excitement. "What happens after the storm passes? You just head back out to deliver more groceries or—" He shrugged with a grin. "Depends. I'm usually just grateful if I don't get soaked to the bone. But honestly, sometimes I hope for a night like this, one where I get to talk to someone instead of just dropping off bags and leaving." I nodded. "Yeah, it's easy to feel invisible with delivery gigs. People just want their stuff and then it's bye. But tonight felt different." "Because of the storm?" he asked. "Partly, but also you." He looked down at our hands, then back up. "I'm glad you said that, because I was kinda hoping I didn't come off as weird for just staying." "Not weird at all," I wanted to say, but instead I caught his gaze and smiled. "Definitely not weird." We fell into silence again, the kind that felt comfortable, like two people who don't need to fill every second with words. I could hear the rain easing off outside, the thunder growing quieter, and a gentle breeze finally sneaking through the cracks of the window. I realized I didn't want this night to end. Not the storm or the way it had brought us together, or the way I felt sitting here with Lucas, like maybe something good could come out of all the crap I'd been dealing with. "So," I said, breaking the silence, "if you're stuck here because of the storm, you might as well stay for dinner, right? I've got plenty of frozen pizza, and I promise I'm not a terrible cook if you survive that." Lucas laughed, that easy, genuine laugh that felt like a balm. "Pizza sounds perfect. And no, I'm willing to risk your cooking." I stood up to grab the pizza from the freezer, and he followed, still shifting a little closer, as if he didn't want to lose this connection. While the pizza baked, we moved to the kitchen counter, sipping the now lukewarm coffee and talking about everything from music to dreams we hadn't dared to say out loud before. He told me about his plan to finish his degree and work in conservation, trying to make a difference in a world that often felt broken. I shared my own hopes to write something that mattered, to get out of this dead-end job and maybe meet someone who wouldn't disappear after the storm. The pizza came out, smelling like a cheesy beacon of normalcy in the middle of this crazy night. We ate sitting cross-legged on the floor, and for a second, it felt like we were two kids sneaking a midnight snack, not two grown men weighed down by years of uncertainty and loneliness. At one point, Lucas reached over and brushed some sauce off my cheek, and I caught his hand, holding it for a beat longer than I meant to. His eyes met mine again, searching, maybe hoping for the same thing I was. "I'm really glad I stayed," he said softly. "Me too," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. The storm that had roared so violently outside was finally fading into the kind of rain that felt more like a lullaby than a threat. The power was still out, but the apartment felt warmer, fuller, like the kind of place you want to come home to. Lucas stood up, stretching a little, then looked down at me with that same open expression. "I should probably head out soon, before the roads get worse again." I nodded, feeling a mix of disappointment and something else. Something hopeful, like this night wasn't the end, but the start. "Before you go," I said, "would you want to meet up again? Maybe without the threat of storms and soggy jackets?" A slow smile spread across his face. "I'd like that." He pulled his phone out and typed something quickly, then handed it to me. I stared at the screen, a message with his number and a little note that said, "Call me, Ethan." I stared at it for a moment, then looked up, feeling a weird flutter in my chest. Maybe storms weren't just about chaos and fear. Maybe they were about washing away the old, making space for something new. Lucas smiled again, this time shy but real, and I realized that sometimes the best deliveries aren't the groceries. They're the moments that remind you you're not as alone as you thought. And just like that, the storm had changed everything. I watched Lucas shrug on his jacket, the damp fabric clinging to him like the storm hadn't quite let go yet. The rain had finally slowed to a drizzle, but the air still smelled like wet asphalt and electricity. I felt this strange mix of reluctance and anticipation, reluctant for the night to end, but curious about what came next. "Hey," I said as he moved toward the door. "Thanks for staying." "Really?" He paused, turning back with that same quiet smile that had been my anchor all evening. "No, thank you for letting me stay, for the pizza, bad jokes, and company." I smiled, feeling warmth spread through my chest. "You're welcome anytime." He gave me one last look, a little longer, a little softer, and stepped outside. The door shut behind him with a gentle click that echoed in the suddenly quiet apartment. I stood there for a moment, the silence settling like a blanket, thicker than before but somehow less lonely. I checked my phone, his message still glowing on the screen, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of something I hadn't dared to expect: hope. The next few days were a blur of normal life mixed with this new excitement buzzing under the surface. I found myself checking my phone more than usual, wondering if I should text him first or wait. Eventually, I broke the silence with a simple, "Hey, how's your week going?" His reply came almost instantly. "Better now that I'm talking to you." I grinned like an idiot, texting back, "Cheesy, but I like it." We started texting more, the conversations flowing easily. No awkward pauses, just two guys getting to know each other beyond the storm and groceries. We swapped playlists, shared memes, and even planned a casual coffee meetup for the weekend. That coffee date was surreal in the best way possible. Lucas showed up with that same messy hair and easy grin, but it felt different, less like a chance encounter, more like the start of something real. We talked about everything and nothing, the way people do when they want to see if the connection from texts and a storm-soaked night holds up in daylight. "I'm glad you asked me out," he said, stirring his coffee. I was nervous. I laughed. "Me too, but I'm glad you showed up." There was a quiet moment, and then he reached across the table, brushing his fingers against mine. The touch was light but electric. "So, what now?" I shrugged but smiled. We see where this goes. No pressure, just maybe something better than being alone on a stormy night. He nodded, eyes shining. I'd like that. Over the next few weeks, Lucas became a regular part of my life, showing up for movie nights, cooking attempts, and long walks that started with just around the block and turned into hours of discovery. The storm that had brought us together became a story we'd laugh about later, a reminder that sometimes the worst weather brings the brightest moments. One night, months later, I found myself staring at the rain again, but this time it was different. It wasn't a force isolating me, but a backdrop to something new. A love that began with groceries and a storm, but grew into something that felt like home. And honestly, I never thought I'd say this, but I was kind of looking forward to the next storm. It's funny how life has this way of flipping your expectations upside down. A few months ago, I was sitting alone in my apartment during a storm, dreading the night ahead. Now I'm sitting next to Lucas on my couch, the rain tapping gently on the windows. And I'm thinking about how much has changed. But let me back up a bit. Because after that coffee date, things didn't just magically fall into place. It wasn't all sunshine and perfect moments. There were awkward silences, moments of doubt, and times when I wondered if I was just fooling myself into feeling something real. Lucas wasn't perfect, neither was I, and the world outside still had its usual chaos. But we kept showing up for each other. One evening, about a month after we'd started hanging out regularly, Lucas came over after work. The sky was this dull gray, the kind that makes you feel like the day's energy has been completely drained. He looked a little tired, and I could tell something was bugging him. "Hey," I said, handing him a cup of tea. "Rough day?" He sighed, sinking down onto the couch next to me. "Yeah, just life stuff. Family drama, school stress. You know how it goes." I nodded, understanding more than I wanted to admit. "Yeah, I do." He looked over at me then, eyes a little vulnerable. "I'm glad you're here, though. Makes the crap days easier." I reached out, running my fingers through his damp hair. "Me too." In that moment, it wasn't about grand gestures or perfect words. It was just two people finding comfort in each other's presence. The rain picked up again outside, soft at first, then steady. It was like the world was reminding us that storms come and go, but sometimes you find shelter right where you least expect it. Weeks went by, and our relationship deepened. We started meeting each other's friends, sharing more of our lives bit by bit. Lucas introduced me to his favorite hiking spots, places where he said he felt connected to something bigger than himself. I showed him my favorite dive bar, the one with terrible music but the best cheap drinks and a jukebox that played the kind of songs you only sing loudly when you think no one's watching. One night, after a particularly long hike that left us muddy and exhausted, we collapsed on my couch. The apartment smelled like sweat and pine, and I found myself just watching him, how the fading daylight caught the little curve of his smile, the way his eyes sparkled when he laughed. "Ethan," he said softly, breaking the comfortable silence, "I don't think I'm ready to let go of this." I smiled, feeling my heart beat a little faster. Neither am I. There have been times when I've caught myself wondering if this is all real. The way he looks at me, the way we fit together like puzzle pieces that were missing for too long. It's messy and imperfect, but it's ours. Last week we had a small argument, nothing serious, but enough to make me question if I was ready to be as vulnerable as I wanted to. Afterward, Lucas stayed quiet for a while, then pulled me close. "I don't want to fight," he said, voice low. "Not when everything else feels so uncertain." I held him tighter, realizing that love isn't about never having problems. It's about choosing each other even when things get rough. Now, sitting here with the rain falling gently outside, I can't help but feel grateful. For the storm that night, for a stranger who stayed when he could have walked away, and for the unexpected way life sometimes throws you exactly what you need. Lucas nudged me, breaking my train of thought. "Hey, you still awake?" I laughed softly. "Yeah, can't sleep with the rain," he smiled, reaching over to tuck a loose strand of hair behind my ear. "Good thing you have me then." "Yeah," I whispered. "Good thing." And as the rain continued to fall, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope that maybe, just maybe, this storm was the start of forever. The rain outside had settled into a steady rhythm, almost like it was keeping time with my heartbeat. Lucas and I sat close on the couch, the soft glow of the lamp casting warm shadows around us. There was this quiet comfort between us. No need to fill the space with words, just the feeling of being together. But then, without warning, Lucas shifted, pulling back just enough to look me in the eye. "Ethan, can I ask you something?" I raised an eyebrow, my curiosity piqued. "Shoot." He hesitated, those intense eyes searching mine like he was weighing whether to dive into something deep or keep it light. "Do you ever wonder if we're rushing? I mean, this whole us thing, it feels amazing, but sometimes I worry about what comes next." I rubbed the back of my neck, feeling that familiar tingle of uncertainty. "Honestly, yeah, but I think that's normal. I'm not exactly a pro at relationships, but I know I don't want to stop seeing where this goes, even if it's messy or complicated." He offered a small smile, relief washing over his features. "Me too. I guess I just wanted to hear it from you." We sat there for a moment, letting the honesty settle between us. It struck me how rare it was to find someone who could be so open about their fears without running away. "Lucas," I said softly, "you're the last person I expected to meet on a night like that stormy one." "But maybe that's the point. Sometimes the messiest beginnings lead to the best stories," he chuckled, nudging me playfully. "Look at you, turning my life philosophy into a cheesy line." I grinned. Cheesy lines save lives. Then, as if the universe was testing us, the power flickered again, and the apartment was plunged into darkness for a second before the lights came back on. We both laughed, the tension broken. "Maybe we should just embrace the chaos," I said. "Storms, power outages, and all." Lucas nodded, eyes shining. "Yeah, together." Over the next few days, the weather stayed unpredictable. Sunny one moment, gray and gloomy the next. It kind of mirrored how I felt inside. Hopeful but cautious, excited but scared. One afternoon, Lucas invited me to a small gallery opening where some of his fellow environmental science students were showcasing eco-inspired art. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I went because, well, Lucas had become my favorite person to say yes to. Walking through the gallery, I found myself drawn not just to the art, but to the way Lucas's face lit up when he talked about the pieces, his passion infectious. At one point, he pulled me aside toward a small painting, a vivid swirl of blues and greens that looked like the ocean in a storm. "This," he said, fingers lightly tracing the frame, "is what I want to help protect. The chaos and beauty of nature, all of it." I nodded, feeling the weight behind his words. "It's incredible, just like you." He laughed, brushing off the compliment, but I caught the flush on his cheeks. Later that evening, as we walked back to my place under a sky that threatened rain but never quite let go, Lucas stopped and looked at me. "You know, I think storms are kind of like us. Unpredictable, maybe a little scary, but full of energy and possibility." I smiled, squeezing his hand. "I like that. Kind of makes me want to dance in the rain." He grinned. "I'm down if you are." So right there on the sidewalk, with the first drops falling, we let ourselves get soaked, laughing, spinning, and chasing each other like kids. It was ridiculous and glorious, the kind of moment that felt like a defiant celebration against all the uncertainty. Afterward, dripping wet but happy, we collapsed onto my couch, wrapping ourselves in blankets and each other. "I think I'm falling for you," Lucas admitted, voice low. My heart nearly stopped. "I'm already there." He looked at me then, eyes shining with something tender and fierce all at once. "No turning back." I shook my head, smiling. "No turning back." The storm outside finally broke, rain fading into a gentle drizzle. Inside, something else was beginning, a feeling that maybe, just maybe, we could weather any storm as long as we had each other. And honestly, I can't wait to see what's next. The days after that soaked, laughing in the rain night felt like we were riding some kind of new current, one that carried us both forward but at a pace neither of us tried to control. It was the kind of feeling you want to bottle up and keep handy for later, you know? Like, hey, when life gets messy, just remember this. Lucas and I had settled into a rhythm that was equal parts casual and charged, like a dance where we didn't always know the steps but trusted each other not to step on any toes. We'd wake up to texts that ranged from, "What's your plan today?" to I'm about to destroy a burrito. Wish you were here. And sometimes, just because, he'd show up at my door with coffee or those ridiculous little pastries from that bakery he swore by. One of those days, I was sprawled on my couch, half watching a documentary about climate change and half dozing when my phone buzzed. Emergency grocery run. Wanna come? Lucas texted, accompanied by the usual trash-talking emojis about his diet. I laughed, grabbed my jacket, and met him outside. The air was crisp and smelled like fall was arriving early. Just the way I liked it. We made a game of the trip, racing down aisles, debating which snacks were essential and which were overhyped. Lucas insisted on buying kale chips, which I pretended to hate but secretly found kinda addicting. Our banter felt effortless, filled with those little inside jokes that spring up when two people start carving out space in each other's lives. At the checkout, Lucas turned to me with that sly grin. You know, I was thinking, since storms brought us together, maybe we should plan for the next big one. Like, prepare for it. I raised an eyebrow, playing along. Prepare how? Stockpile pizza and bad movies? Exactly. And maybe have a backup generator, he said, laughing. But seriously, I want to be the guy who shows up when the weather's terrible, not just the one who waits for the delivery. Something about that stuck with me. It wasn't just about storms or groceries anymore. It was about being there. For the good days, the bad, and all the unpredictable moments in between. Later that night, as we cooked dinner together in my cramped kitchen, Lucas somehow managing to make even instant noodles seem gourmet, the conversation drifted. Do you ever think about the future? I asked, stirring the pot. Lucas looked thoughtful. All the time. It's scary and exciting. I want to make a difference, but I also want to build something real. Something that lasts. I smiled, feeling my chest tighten in a good way. Yeah, me too. He reached out and brushed a strand of hair from my face. I'm glad I found you, even in the middle of a storm. I caught his hand and squeezed it. Me too. That night, lying next to each other with the rain softly tapping the window, I realized something important. Love isn't always about fireworks or perfect moments. Sometimes it's about showing up, over and over, even when the sky is dark and the roads are slick. And with Lucas, I wanted to show up. Every time. A few weeks later, we finally faced our first real test. Lucas got a call from his family. His dad was sick, and he needed to go home for a while. It wasn't just a quick visit. It could turn into something much longer. When he told me, I felt that weird mix of pride and panic. Proud that he was taking care of what mattered, but panicked because the thought of him being away felt like losing my anchor. Do you think this changes things? I asked him one evening, nervous. Lucas shook his head. No, it's just a chapter. We're still us. He packed a bag, and the night before he left, we sat on the floor surrounded by packed boxes and half-empty coffee mugs. The silence was heavy but not uncomfortable. I'm going to miss you, I admitted, voice cracking a little. He pulled me close, forehead resting against mine. I'll miss you too. But this isn't goodbye. It's just, see you later. We stayed like that for a long time, holding on to the moment before life pulled us in separate directions. The first week apart was tough. I missed his laugh, his casually messy hair, the way he made even the most boring days feel like an adventure. We texted constantly, had late-night calls, and sent each other playlists to keep the connection alive. One night, during a particularly bad storm, ironic, right? My power went out. Sitting alone in the dark, I thought about how Lucas would probably be the first person I'd want to call. And without hesitation, I dialed his number. Hey, he answered, voice soft but steady. I'm sitting in the dark missing you, I said. There was a pause, then he laughed. Same here. Remember when the storm brought us together? Maybe it can finish the job. That night, miles apart but connected by the storm and some invisible thread, I realized something. Distance and weather could never mess with what we had. We'd built something stronger than that. When Lucas finally came back, it felt like the world had realigned. We picked up right where we left off, but with a deeper understanding of what it meant to be there for each other, through storms, distance, and everything else. Sitting here now, watching the rain fall softly against the window, I know one thing for sure. Life will always have storms. But with Lucas by my side, I'm ready for whatever comes next. It was a quiet night, the kind where the rain had finally tapered off to a soft drizzle, and the city seemed to hold its breath. Lucas and I were curled up on the couch, a blanket pulled over our legs, the hum of the apartment's heater filling the spaces between us. Nothing flashy, no grand gestures, just us, finally comfortable enough to just be. I looked over at him, tracing the curve of his smile, the way his eyes crinkled when he laughed softly at something I'd said. It hit me how far we'd come. From a stormy night when he'd knocked on my door with groceries, soaked to the bone, to this moment where his presence felt like home. You know, I said quietly, I was thinking about that first night, about how random it all seemed. Lucas nodded, his eyes searching mine. Yeah? What about it? That, if it hadn't rained that bad, if the power hadn't gone out, if you hadn't stayed, I don't know where I'd be. Probably still stuck in that lonely rut. He squeezed my hand gently. Sometimes it takes a storm to shake things up, to make space for new beginnings. I smiled, feeling the warmth spread through me, not just from the blanket, but from something deeper. I'm glad you stayed. More than that, I'm glad you didn't just deliver the groceries and disappear. Me too, he said, voice soft. It's funny how moments like that can change everything. We sat in silence a bit longer, just breathing in the quiet comfort. No rush, no pressure, just two people who had found something rare in a world that often feels chaotic and uncertain. You ever think about what comes next? I asked, the question lingering between us. Lucas looked thoughtful, then met my gaze with steady eyes. I think about it more now than ever, and whatever it is, I want it to be with you. My heart caught, but I didn't panic. This felt real, earned, grounded in all the small moments, the late-night talks, the awkward silences, the laughter. Not perfect, but ours. I want that too, I said. No storms, no distractions, just us figuring it out together. He smiled, a genuine, hopeful smile that made the world outside seem a little less daunting. And in that simple exchange, I felt something settle deep inside me. A quiet certainty that sometimes love doesn't come crashing in like a thunderstorm. Sometimes it arrives like the steady, gentle rain afterward, nourishing everything and promising growth. As the city lights blinked softly through the window, I realized I wasn't afraid anymore, because for the first time in a long time, I had someone beside me, not just through the storms, but through all the days in between, and that made all the difference.